You need to back off right now, I am warning you.
Sir, calm down, that is enough. You are coming with me.
The boarding announcement echoed through gate 47, but one passenger wasn't going anywhere. His voice cut through the terminal like a knife. "Go back to Africa where you belong!" Heads turned. Phones came out. The young black woman he was screaming at? She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just looked at him with an expression that made everyone wonder, what did she know that he didn't? In 30 seconds, this man's entire world was about to collapse, and it would happen in front of hundreds of witnesses.
Captain Amara Thompson had been awake since 4 a.m. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the knot in her stomach as she drove to the airport, a feeling she'd learned to recognize over her 12 years of flying. It was the same feeling she got every time she prepared to walk through a terminal in uniform, knowing that some people would see her pilot stripes and refuse to believe them. She was 34 years old, one of fewer than 150 black female airline captains in the entire United States. The statistics weren't just numbers to her. They were the weight she carried every time she signed her name to a flight manifest, accepting responsibility for 300 lives at 35,000 feet. Her morning routine was precise, almost ritualistic. Dark coffee, no sugar. Weather briefing at 5:30. Pre-flight checklist memorized but reviewed anyway, because complacency killed pilots faster than mechanical failure. She'd chosen the orange pinstripe suit deliberately, professional but vibrant, refusing to disappear into the drab grays and blacks that dominated the cockpit. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, her captain's wings polished until they caught the light. The drive to the airport took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Amara used the time to center herself, listening to Coltrane's A Love Supreme, the way other pilots might listen to a pump-up playlist. She needed the calm. She needed to remember why she'd fought so hard to earn those 4 stripes on her shoulders. Her father had been a mechanic at this very airport. He'd worked on planes his entire life, but never flew in one until Amara took him up on her first solo flight as a certified pilot. He'd cried in the cockpit that day, touching the controls with hands that had repaired them for 30 years, but never commanded them. "You're flying for all of us," he'd whispered, every black child who was told they couldn't. But that pride came with a price she'd paid repeatedly. The airport was already buzzing when she arrived. Holiday travel season meant packed flights, stressed passengers, and delays that would test everyone's patience. Amara moved through the employee entrance, nodding to familiar faces, ground crew, other pilots, flight attendants who'd flown with her before. There was a comfortable rhythm to the morning, a sense of belonging that she'd earned through thousands of hours in the air and impeccable safety records. She stopped by the crew lounge to check the manifest for Flight 1847 to Miami. Full capacity. Middle seat hell for the passengers, but it meant the airline was happy. She reviewed the weather patterns, clear skies, minimal turbulence expected. It should be a smooth flight. Her first officer, Jason Martinez, was already reviewing the flight plan when she arrived. They'd flown together dozens of times, had developed the kind of shorthand that came from trusting someone with your life. "Morning, Captain," he said without looking up. "We've got a gate change. They moved us to 47. Amara nodded, making a mental note. Gate changes always created confusion, meant extra announcements, frustrated passengers wondering why they had to walk further. "Let's get the pre-flight done early. I want to board on time if we can." The walk to Gate 47 meant cutting through the main terminal. This was the part Amara had learned to brace herself for, the moment when she became visible. When passengers saw her in uniform, pulling her flight bag behind her, captain's stripes clear on her shoulders. Some smiled, some nodded respectfully. Others did double takes, their eyes moving from her face to her stripes and back again, as if solving a puzzle that didn't quite fit. She had learned to read those expressions: surprise, confusion, sometimes barely concealed skepticism. A little black girl, maybe 7 years old, tugged on her mother's sleeve as Amara passed. "Mommy, look, that lady is a pilot." The mother smiled, pride evident in her eyes, and Amara winked at the child. Those moments made everything else worthwhile. But she also noticed the man in the beige suit. He was standing near gate 47, pacing like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear. Late 30s, maybe 40. The kind of agitated energy that flight crews learned to spot. Passengers who were already on edge before boarding. The ones who would complain about everything from seat assignments to the temperature of their coffee. Amara filed the observation away and kept walking toward the gate podium. She had a job to do. She had a plane to fly, and she'd be damned if anyone's assumptions stopped her from doing it. She had no idea that in less than an hour, that man in the beige suit would be screaming in her face, and that the entire terminal would be watching.
The first sign of trouble came during pre-boarding. Amara was standing at the gate podium, reviewing the passenger list with the gate agent when she heard raised voices. The man in the beige suit, the one she'd noticed earlier, was arguing with the agent at the desk. "What do you mean my seat was changed? I specifically requested an aisle seat in first class." His voice carried across the waiting area, drawing uncomfortable glances from other passengers. The gate agent, a young woman named Keisha, who looked barely out of college, maintained her professional smile despite the aggression. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. Due to a weight balance issue, we had to reassign some seats. You're still in first class, just a different row." "I don't want a different row. I want the seat I paid for." He slammed his boarding pass on the counter. Amara exchanged a glance with Keisha, silently communicating what they both knew. This was going to be one of those flights. But it was still manageable. Angry passengers happened. You de-escalated. You stayed professional. You moved on. The man finally snatched his boarding pass back and stalked toward the boarding line, radiating hostility. Amara made a mental note to brief the flight attendants about a potentially difficult passenger in 2B. Boarding proceeded normally. Families with small children first, then first class, then the endless parade of groups 1 through 9. Amara always positioned herself near the gate during boarding, not because she had to, but because she believed passengers deserved to see their captain, to know who was flying them home. Most people smiled when they saw her. Some looked surprised, but recovered quickly. A few did obvious double-takes. The man in the beige suit was one of the latter. He stopped dead when he saw her standing there in her captain's uniform, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto her face. For a moment, he just stared. Then he looked at Keisha, then back to Amara, as if waiting for someone to explain the joke. "Are you?" he started, then stopped. His jaw tightened. "Are you the pilot?" Amara had heard that question in a dozen different tones over the years. Sometimes it was genuine curiosity. Sometimes it was barely masked disbelief. This time, it was something else, something that made her spine straighten instinctively. "I'm Captain Thompson," she said evenly. "I'll be flying you to Miami today." He didn't move, didn't smile, just stared at her with an expression that was rapidly morphing from surprise to something uglier. "You're the captain," he repeated flatly. "That's correct. Enjoy your flight, sir." She turned back to the podium, dismissing him professionally. Behind her, she heard him mutter something under his breath, too quiet to make out the words, but the tone was clear enough. Keisha shot Amara a concerned look, but Amara just shook her head slightly. She'd dealt with worse. The boarding process continued. 90% of passengers boarded without incident, tired business travelers, families wrangling children, elderly couples moving slowly down the jetway. Normal, routine, the rhythm of commercial aviation that Amara knew by heart. Then 15 minutes before scheduled departure, the man in the beige suit came back up the jetway. He was walking fast, his face flushed, and he went straight to the podium where Keisha was processing the last few passengers. "I need to speak to a supervisor," he demanded. Keisha blinked. "Sir, is there a problem with your seat?" "I need to speak to a supervisor, now." Amara was still near the gate, checking a message from the operations center on her phone. She looked up, her professional instincts pinging. This wasn't about a seat anymore. The terminal supervisor, a middle-aged white man named Paul, arrived within minutes. "I'm the supervisor. How can I help you?" The man in the beige suit pointed directly at Amara. "Is she actually qualified to fly this plane?" The terminal quieted. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Passengers waiting for other flights looked up from their phones. Even the crying baby 2 gates down seemed to pause. Paul's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm not sure what you're implying, but—" "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking a direct question. How do I know she's actually a qualified pilot? How do I know this isn't some diversity hire situation where the airline is more concerned with looking progressive than with passenger safety?" The words hung in the air like poison gas. Amara felt the familiar heat rising in her chest. Not panic, but controlled fury. She'd prepared for this moment her entire career. She'd been warned by other black pilots, especially the women, that it would happen, that someone would question her credentials, her competence, her right to sit in the left seat. But knowing it would happen didn't make it hurt less. She stepped forward, her voice calm, but carrying clearly across the gate area. "Sir, I'm not sure what your concern is, but I can assure you—" "I don't want assurances from you," he cut her off. "I want to see your credentials. I want to see proof that you're actually qualified to fly a commercial aircraft. Because honestly, I don't look like any pilot I've ever seen." There it was. The thing he'd been dancing around, finally said plainly enough that no one could pretend to misunderstand. "You don't look like any pilot I've ever seen." Keisha gasped softly. Paul's jaw tightened, and Amara felt every eye in the terminal turn toward her. Some sympathetic, some shocked, some carefully neutral, trying to avoid involvement. "Sir," Paul said firmly, "Captain Thompson is a fully qualified, FAA-certified airline transport pilot with over 8,000 flight hours. She has flown for this airline for 12 years with an impeccable safety record. If you have concerns about flying today, we can rebook you on a later flight, but I will not tolerate harassment of our crew." The man's face was getting redder. "This is harassment. Me asking reasonable questions about safety. You're going to play that card? I'm going to ask you once more to lower your voice and return to your seat, or I'll have to remove you from this flight." That's when the man snapped. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, his voice echoing through the terminal. "We're supposed to trust our lives to. He gestured wildly at Amara, his hand cutting through the air dismissively. "To someone who probably only got this job because of affirmative action, because the airline needed to check a box. This is insane." Several passengers were recording on their phones now. I could see the red dots of live streams starting. In the social media age, every confrontation was one click away from going viral. She kept her expression neutral, professional, even though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but I need you to know that every pilot at this airline meets the exact same standards." "Don't patronize me," he snarled, stepping closer. "I have a right to feel safe. I have a right to question whether someone is competent when they're responsible for my life. And if you can't handle basic questions, maybe you're not cut out for this job." Paul moved to position himself between the man and Amara. "Sir, final warning. Return to the aircraft, or you will be denied boarding." The man's eyes swept across the terminal, taking in the watching faces, the phones, the judgment. He was past the point of backing down gracefully. "Fine, I'll go back to my seat, but I'm filing a formal complaint, and I'm posting about this. People have a right to know when airlines are putting political correctness ahead of passenger safety." He turned and stalked back down the jetway, but not before pausing at the entrance, to deliver one final shot, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Go back to Africa where you belong. This is America. Real Americans don't want diversity hires flying them around." The silence that followed was deafening.
Amara stood frozen, her professional mask cracking for just a moment. Around her, the terminal erupted in reactions. Gasps, angry mutters, a few people openly shouting at the man's retreating back. Someone yelled, "That's racist as hell." Another passenger applauded. But Amara barely heard any of it. Her ears were ringing, her hands were shaking, and she clasped them behind her back so no one could see. Go back to Africa. 4 words that reduced her entire life, her education, her training, her thousands of hours in the cockpit, her perfect safety record, to nothing. 4 words that told her she would never belong, no matter how many stripes she earned. Keisha was crying openly at the podium. Paul was on his radio calling for airport security, and Amara had a choice to make. She could walk away, ground the flight, let someone else take her seat, or she could do her job. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and looked at Paul. "I need to do my final walk around and finish the pre-flight checklist. We're still departing on time." Paul's eyes widened. "Amara, you don't have to." "Yes," she said quietly, "I do." Because if she walked away now, that man won. And every black child who dreamed of flying would learn that racism could still ground you, even with wings. She picked up her flight bag and walked toward the jetway, her head high. The terminal watched in silence as she disappeared into the aircraft.
The aircraft felt different when Amara stepped inside. Heavier. The air thick with tension that made her skin prickle. The flight attendants were clustered near the galley, their faces pale and tight. Sarah, the lead attendant, grabbed Amara's arm as she passed. "Captain, we heard what happened. That man in 2B, he's been ranting to everyone around him. Do you want security to remove him?" Amara looked down the length of the cabin. She could see him, the man in the beige suit, his face still flushed, gesturing emphatically to the passenger beside him. Even from here, she could read his body language. Self-righteous, aggrieved, convinced he was the victim. Every instinct told her to have him removed. It would be justified. His behavior had been threatening, discriminatory, disruptive. Any airline would back her decision. But removing him meant he could tell his story his way, that he'd been censored for asking questions, that he'd been punished for caring about safety. He'd become a martyr for every racist who'd ever questioned whether black people belonged in positions of authority. "No," Amara said quietly. "He stays on the flight." Sarah's eyes widened. "Captain!" "He stays. But brief the crew. If he becomes disruptive during flight, we handle it by the book, and Sarah." Amara met her eyes. "Make sure you're recording any interactions. Document everything." "Are you sure you're okay to fly this?" It was the question Amara had been asking herself since the moment she heard those 4 words, "Go back to Africa." Was she okay? Her hands had stopped shaking, but her chest felt tight. Her mind kept replaying the confrontation, analyzing it, dissecting every word and expression. But she'd learned something over 12 years of flying. You never felt completely ready. Not for your first solo flight, not for your first emergency landing, not for the first time someone questioned whether you belonged in the cockpit because of your skin color. You just did it anyway. "I'm fine," she told Sarah. "Let's get this bird in the air." The cockpit was her sanctuary. The moment she slid into the left seat, some of the tension eased from her shoulders. Here, everything made sense. The instruments didn't care about her race. The physics of flight were colorblind. The plane would respond to her inputs exactly the same way it would respond to anyone else's. Jason was already there, running through the checklist. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Hey, I heard what happened. You want to talk about it?" "After we're airborne," Amara said, settling into her seat. "Let's fly." They worked through the pre-flight checklist with practiced efficiency. Fuel quantity, check. Hydraulics, check. Flight controls, check. The familiar rhythm calmed her, reminded her who she was. Not the woman a racist passenger had tried to diminish in the terminal, but Captain Amara Thompson, airline transport pilot, qualified on 3 aircraft types with a safety record that airlines used as a training example. The pushback was smooth. The taxi to the runway was routine. And when Amara keyed the radio to request takeoff clearance, her voice was steady and professional. Tower, Coastal 1847, ready for departure. Coastal 1847, cleared for takeoff, runway 27. Wind 270 at 10 knots. Cleared for takeoff, runway 27, Coastal 1847. Her hands moved across the controls with the muscle memory of thousands of flights. Throttles forward. Engine gauges rising smoothly. Airspeed building. 60 knots, 80 knots, 100 knots. V1, Jason called. The point of no return. They were committed now. Rotate. Amara pulled back gently on the yoke, and the Boeing 737 lifted gracefully into the Florida sky. The runway fell away beneath them. The airport grew smaller. And for just a moment, Amara allowed herself to feel the pure joy of flight. The moment when metal and fuel and physics conspired to defy gravity. To prove that human ingenuity could overcome anything, even hatred. Positive rate, Jason announced. Gear up. They climbed through 10,000 feet, then 20,000, then 30,000, until Miami Center cleared them to their cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The autopilot engaged with a soft beep. The flight should be smooth from here. 2 hours of straight flying, then an approach into Miami International. Should be. 20 minutes into the flight, Sarah's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, we have a situation in the cabin." Amara's stomach dropped. What kind of situation? Passenger in 2B is refusing to comply with crew instructions. He's moved seats without permission, and he's trying to access the forward cabin. He's demanding to speak to you. Of course he was. Amara looked at Jason. "You have the aircraft." "He has the aircraft," he confirmed. She unbuckled and moved to the cockpit door, her mind racing. In the post-9/11 world, any passenger attempting to access the flight deck was treated as a threat. Security protocols were clear, but this wasn't a terrorist. This was a man who'd built his rage to a breaking point and now needed an audience for his grievance. She opened the cockpit door. The man in the beige suit was standing in the galley, blocked by Sarah and 2 other flight attendants. His face was scarlet now, veins standing out in his neck. When he saw Amara, his eyes lit with vindication. "There you are," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I want to know what the hell you think you're doing flying this plane. I want to know what qualifications you actually have, because I've been looking you up on my phone, and you know what I found? Nothing. No military background, no test pilot experience, just diversity program after diversity program." "Sir," Amara interrupted, her voice cutting through his rant like a blade. "You need to return to your seat immediately." "Or what? You'll have me arrested? For asking questions? For caring about safety?" The other passengers were watching now, some craning their necks to see, others recording on their phones. Amara could see the calculation in his eyes. He wanted an audience, wanted this to go viral, wanted to prove some point about woke airlines and unqualified minorities. "Sir," Amara said, her voice calm but hard as steel, "I am a fully qualified airline transport pilot. I have 8,000 hours of flight time. I graduated at the top of my class from flight school. I've flown in severe weather, handled multiple emergency landings, and have never had a single incident on my record. I earned every single stripe on my uniform through years of training, testing, and experience. And right now, I am safely flying 300 passengers, including you, to Miami." "That's not good enough," he spat. "I don't care what you want," Amara said, and something in her tone made him stop mid-sentence. "What you want doesn't matter. What matters is that I do my job, and I do it well, regardless of how you or anyone else feels about the color of my skin. Now, you have 2 choices. You can return to your seat quietly, or I can declare an emergency,
divert this aircraft to the nearest airport, and have you arrested by federal air marshals for interfering with the flight crew. Which would you prefer?" The silence stretched. The man's face went through a series of expressions: rage, calculation, uncertainty. He looked at the other passengers, many of whom were now openly glaring at him. He looked at the flight attendants, stone-faced and united. And he looked at Amara, standing in her captain's uniform, utterly unmoved by his tantrum. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Actually," Amara said softly, "it is. Return to your seat now." He turned and stalked back down the aisle, his shoulders rigid with humiliation. Amara waited until he was seated before returning to the cockpit. Her legs felt weak. Her hands were shaking again. But she'd done it. She'd stood her ground. Jason looked at her as she buckled back in. "That was intense." "Yeah," Amara took a breath, steadying herself. "But we're still flying, and we're landing this plane on time. Because that's what captains do, no matter what."
A $200 million CEO arrives at his private jet, but the pilot refuses to let him board. Marcus Webb chartered this $47,000 flight for an urgent meeting. He had his boarding pass, his ID, everything checked out. But the pilot looked at him and said, "I need additional verification. You could be a threat." A threat! The man in the $4,000 suit was called a threat. Then another passenger recognized him. "Do you know who this is? This is Marcus Webb, one of the most successful CEOs in America." The pilot was fired within 48 hours. But Marcus, he used his voice to expose what millions face every day, being guilty until proven successful. Would you speak up if you saw this happen? Comment below.